I want to share a friendly reminder with all of you. We are nothing more than one ride or completed delivery away from being deactivated from the very gig apps that we work. And I'm going to talk about that on this segment of the Gig Geezer. If this is your first time checking out the Gig Geezer, or if you're a returning visitor of the Gig Geezer, hey, thanks for coming by. And if you would not mind, hit that subscribe button, give my content a thumbs up, share my content among others, and I definitely welcome your comments in the section below. The source of this segment of the Gig Geezer is a guest column that appeared in the February 28, 2023 edition of the Los Angeles Times. The reason why this the reason why this column caught my attention is because first, it's the Los Angeles Times. That is a publication that I'm more than familiar with on a personal basis as well as a professional basis, in which I date back to my years as a newspaper reporter. The next reason is that the first person who is quoted in this column is of a similar demographic as myself. Additionally, he's a hardworking person who happens to be a single father of five. The next reason why this article caught my attention is because that same driver um, lives in the city of Inglewood, a place that I'm more than familiar with from my past. And lastly, this article deals with gig workers, namely rideshare drivers from the Uber and Lyft apps. Being the numbers person that I am, uh, the columnist mentioned that there were 810 drivers who'd been surveyed. And in that survey, 540 drivers indicated they'd been deactivated from either Uber or Lyft, of which 40% of the drivers, 320, had been permanently deactivated from the app, and 24% of the drivers had been deactivated permanently from the Lyft app, or about 200 drivers. And roughly one third of the drivers in the survey, or about 270, received no explanation why they'd been deactivated from either app. Now, that sounds quite familiar, at least in my experience in the gig economy, which dates back to September 2016. It's an all too familiar experience in which you're apprised of being deactivated, and when you try to find out what it is, when you try to find out why, you never find that reason. Now, also of a personal note, I indicated in this segment of the Gig Geezer how I'd been deactivated from two apps specifically, Grubhub and Waiter slash bitesquad slash ASAP, in which I'd been deactivated for low acceptance rate, or as I termed in that same segment of the Gig Geezer, how acceptance how acceptance rates matter for the wrong reasons. This article goes on to indicate, at least from a social breakdown, that 69% of the drivers who'd been deactivated were people of color. The column indicated that 57% of the drivers who'd been deactivated were white. But what's more impactful is that 86% of the drivers, or roughly 720 or so, 86% of the drivers all experienced serious economic hardship, of which 12%, or roughly 100 of the drivers had lost their homes as a result of being deactivated. Now, the mere fact that these drivers had been deactivated, or you can even say the mere fact that I'd been deactivated from a couple of apps, and by the way, with Grubhub, I have since been reactivated under a different account. This is a good lesson. This is a good lesson as to why working multiple apps is so important. Because if you are deactivated from an app, you have other options to make up the difference. And in the case for me with Grubhub and ASAP, they had no impact on how I went about making my money. Now, the other lesson, or the other reality about deactivation, is that regardless of how glowing your metrics are, or regardless of how not as glowing as your metrics are, deactivation can still happen. That means if you're in DoorDash and you're a top dasher, you got 100%, you've got 100% in your metrics that they count. It doesn't matter if a customer claims that they didn't get their order, and DoorDash's algorithm determines that that is worthy of an offense of deactivation. That's a reality. Now the column goes on to indicate that among Uber drivers, their average experience had been 4.5 years. On the Lyft app, the average experience of these drivers who've been deactivated had been 4 years. So again, it doesn't matter how many rides you've completed on the app, you can still be deactivated at any time. Now, as with any app, there are two ways in which you kind of have an idea that you've been deactivated. The first one is that you may receive an email, and these emails may indicate in there that you have the option or the opportunity to appeal the deactivation, but I'll talk further about that. The other way of knowing that you've been deactivated is if you try to turn on the app and for whatever reason you can't get in the app. In fact, it goes to a page in which, oh, you want to join us? You want to be onboarded? Here's you need to click this. Now, eventually, if that's the case, you'll eventually get an email indicating that you've been deactivated. Now, in this column, the single father of five was quoted as saying, "It's cruel, man," when he spoke of being deactivated. It's almost like Uber sees the drivers like a piece of equipment or a gadget or something, and they can just flip a switch and then you're off. Well, that kind of supports what I've been saying on many occasions. In fact, even on this segment of the Gig Geezer, that we're nothing more than blips on their algorithm. Because when it comes to deactivation, and I'm going to kind of give it the way I would normally explain it, which may be a $5 method, because certain metrics are computed as being outside of an acceptable range of metrics, that may trigger a message, or that data may be viewed by the algorithm as something um, worthy of being reviewed, and it may be reviewed by a human, but but if it's reviewed by the human, the human is nothing more is merely going. What the human is going to do is review the parameters by which a person may be a candidate for being deactivated. In other words, let's say that a driver has all of a sudden shown a recent history of completing orders too late. Now, the algorithm has enough data to trigger a message, a warning message, some type of data report to someone who's to a group of people who are constantly analyzing the metrics from all the drivers. And now these drivers fall under this data list of drivers who may be in danger or have come upon endangerment of being deactivated. And in all too many cases, what the people who are evaluating this data, that this constant stream of data, they're going to go nothing more. They're going to do is go according to the guidelines that have already been set by the algorithm, and say, "Oh, okay, that person's done." Now, these metrics, as I've kind of described, may be reviewed by humans, but rarely do they take into full account of all the facts and all the circumstances that may be worth examining. And so when we when we are given that option to appeal, by and large, that appeal has already that appeal is nothing more than a effort in futility. It's nothing more than you exercising something that's already been predetermined. That's what I'm getting at. In other words, the algorithm already has the final say. Now, the column quotes Ms. Nicole Moore, who is the president of the Rideshare Drivers United. She says, when the company gives algorithms the power to deactivate us without listening to our evidence or testimony, it adds to even more precarity to an already precarious job. In other words, this is what I've been saying all along. We are nothing more than one ride or delivery away from being deactivated. Now, if you like the content that's been provided in this segment of the Gig Geezer or in any other segment of the Gig Geezer, hit that subscribe button, give my content a thumbs up, share my content among others, and I definitely welcome your comments in the section below. Now, not only that, what's even more so telling is that when you're a rideshare driver, I think your situation is even more precarious than a food delivery driver, or for that matter, a last mile delivery driver. The reason is that a rider's words and actions are treated with impunity by Uber and Lyft. In other words, they can damn near do anything, anything. They can say just about anything, and Uber and Lyft will consider what they say as gospel. Think about that. Now, what I'm going to do at this point, I want to share a couple of my personal experiences from this particular segment of the Gig Geezer. In fact, it's going to be an excerpt from this segment of the Gig Geezer in which I shared how I had been temporarily deactivated by Uber, and then how I'd received a series of emails over a stretch of 6 months in which I fought tooth and nail with Lyft, where I went through a stretch of dealing with a bunch of bad customers. And some of the things that they claimed against me were absolutely outrageous. Was under the topic of my vehicle lacking cleanliness. In fact, in one case, a woman said that my vehicle had smelled like dogs had been in it. Well, I've not owned a dog since childhood. And so at that time, we're talking at least 45 years. Secondly, that occurred in 2018. The allegation was waged out of uh, driving this lady from a hood apartment to a facility in West Columbia. Um, the only time a dog had been in my vehicle, which is one of those stress dogs, like those military um, dogs that veterans use for stress, um, that occurred in Charleston. And I don't recall that being in the same day. Well, the second time, in addition to the claim of my vehicle lacking cleanliness, the rider, who was from Florida and a actual rideshare driver, he claimed that my vehicle was basically a functioning piece of shit. And these are a series of pictures and receipts that are linked to this particular incident. So what it was that we're traveling on the freeway having left the airport, and we're about 10, 15 minutes into the drive, and all of a sudden I experienced at 75 miles an hour a very bad vibration, rumbling, and then like a grinding and screeching that could have been compared to like a wheel hub that had gone bad, or um, the rotor was grinding up against the brake caliper. Well, what actually had happened, there was a bolt that had backed out of the back of my brake caliper bracket, and it caused the rotor to kind of be unstable. And I pointed this out to the driver, also noting that this had happened to me on a different vehicle like a couple years prior. Well, the rider went ahead and hailed another Uber. But then a couple of hours later, I got a notification from Uber that my account had been placed on hold due to these added allegations by this rider. Well, it took me the rest of the afternoon to try to find where I could locate this bolt. I'd gone to a couple of part shops, and I then, after spending a couple of hours, made the determination I had to go to the Ford dealership. And so this is where all the receipts and the actual bolt that you see, not to mention the before and after where the bolt was replaced. And the following morning, I was cleared by Uber but you can tell some of the bullshit that was communicated to me. Going back to the intent of this segment of the Gig Geezer, I'm going to establish again that a rider's actions are committed with impunity. A writer's words are treated basically as gospel. And here are a few all too common examples of what I mean. First one, a customer claims a driver's vehicle reeks of alcohol and weed. In this article, Ms. Moore shared the outcome of a driver friend of hers who happened to have been sober for over 20 years. The writer claimed that the driver was drunk. Yeah, that's right, drunk. Now the driver went to the police department and begged that they allow her to take a breathalyzer test. The police refused it because there had been no crime reported. So the driver was without any substantial evidence to provide to Uber that could refute that rider's claim. And so the driver was, in fact, deactivated. The driver says that she went about a week without any income as a result of that deactivation. Now, before I go into the before I share the experience of the driver, the Uber driver who is in a similar demographic of mine, I want to put this out there as well. The information that the clip that I shared in this segment of the Gig User, that is material that was based off of my time driving in 2017 and 2018. Now, one thing that I've not mentioned, that I didn't mention in that segment of the Gig Geezer, but I'm sharing it now. What I found out when I was fighting tooth and nail with Lyft, and even when I tried to refute some claims by riders on the Uber app, I posed a question to these people back then. What if the driver has video evidence that refutes what has been claimed against them? Both apps told me that they do not consider video evidence provided by a driver. And that's fucked up. So that means that they will go by they will take the word of a rider, but they won't take video evidence that shows otherwise. So that tells me that we really have to be mindful and vigilant. And so personally, when I was doing rideshare, there were there were rides that I would not accept. If I can tell on the map that it is a pickup from a certain part of the Columbia, South Carolina metropolitan area, I wouldn't take it. I wouldn't take the risk. Likewise, when I have done gig food delivery work, if I can tell on the map that it's going to a certain part of town or certain places or certain area that I believe that is risky, I won't do it. I just won't risk. I won't risk having to go through proving otherwise the lies that you know as well as I know and have experienced, that the lies that customers will commit just to get something for nothing, or in some cases out of retaliation. Now, I want to talk about that driver who's of the similar demographic as mine. Now, he learned only after taking Uber to small claims court what were the claims that were made against him. One case, it was a customer claim that he used profanity against them. Another one says that he had broached an inappropriate contact with the rider. In both cases, the driver offered to show video footage to prove otherwise, but Uber refused to consider it. And also, when when he presented his case in court, the judge ruled against him because the judge, in his determination, said that the driver had agreed to submit to Uber's terms of service. And so, regardless of how wrong things may have been, because the driver had agreed to Uber's terms of service, he pretty much had no case against him. That's in a nutshell what the judge had told him. The column went on to say that Uber, in its fine print, reserves the right to deactivate a driver's account if it determines that a driver has in fact violated its policies. That's right. I'm going to paraphrase what Uber had was quoted as saying in this column. Uber says that they have a rigorous evaluation process that is led by humans, and the humans determine whether a temporary or permanent deactivation is warranted. Now, that's just Uber covering its ass. The gist of the column wanted to show how inhumane us drivers are treated with these deactivations. But also, my doing this segment of the Gig Geezer is really to remind you how precarious our situation is with all these apps. How we are literally, and I've said it now for the third time, we are literally one ride or one delivery away from being deactivated. That's not a good situation to be operating in. And while there are some governmental jurisdictions that are trying to put into law some protections for us drivers, whether these pieces of legislation are actually passed and are enacted, we know that these gig app companies have such ambiguous legalese that they will find a way to use it to their advantage against us. So keep that in mind when you're out there doing your gig work, when you're out there putting in your gig grind and gig hustle. And with that, if you like the content that's been provided in this segment of the Gig Geezer or in any other segment of the Gig Geezer, hit that subscribe button, give my content a thumbs up, share my content among others, and I definitely welcome your comments in the section below. I'm in Wood Lane. As always, may your grind and may your hustle continue.